If something isn't impossible, then there must be a way of doing it. Sir Nicholas Winton.
During the Holocaust, a total of 1.5 million children were murdered at the hands of the Nazis. Nearly all these children, who had no control over their fate, were killed because of their faith. However, in the months leading up to the invasion of Poland, most of the world ignored the rise of the Nazis and let them rob the futures of these children. One man, however, refused to be a bystander and felt compelled to save Czechoslovakian children who were in the midst of imminent danger. In 1939, Nicholas Winton took a vital stand and organized the escape of 669 Czechoslovakian children to safety in Great Britain. In spite of the obstacles set by his government, Winton persisted and inspired many others to save these children. Because of his courage, over 6,000 people now owe their lives to him. On October 1, 1938, Adolf Hitler, Chancellor of Germany, seized a portion of Czechoslovakia bordering Germany called the Sudetenland. The Sudetenland region was home to thousands of people who were political opponents of the Nazis. To avoid certain persecution or even death, many of these people migrated to the capital Prague. There, refugee camps were set up with little access to food and warm clothes. However, escaping Czechoslovakia was nearly impossible, as most of the world closed its borders on Nazi-threatened people. One of the few countries that admitted refugees was Great Britain. Despite Britain's willingness to open its borders to refugees, the English government was still reluctant and imposed restrictions. Through a policy known as appeasement, Great Britain was hoping to peacefully prevent war against Germany. Britain chose to ignore the growing danger from the Nazis and continued to enforce strict refugee immigration policies. The legislation in November of 1938 slightly eased these policies. Admitting refugees remained a low priority for the English government. As a result, all work necessary to send people to Britain was taken on by volunteer organizations. These organizations were granting visas from the British government to adults and their families. During Christmas of 1938, Nicholas Winton, a 29-year-old English stockbroker, came to Prague on the request of his friend, Martin Blake. Blake was working through one of the volunteer organizations and urged Winton to witness firsthand what was happening in Czechoslovakia. One of the first things Winton did in Prague was visit the refugee camps, where he was shocked by the squalid living conditions. What stood out to him the most was the vulnerability of the children, who had no control over their fate.
What Nicky Winton found was that there were people working to get adults out, but nobody was doing anything about children. And if the parents couldn't go, then the children couldn't go either. So he decided he could at least get the children out.
Soon, word spread around Prague that an Englishman was evacuating children out of Czechoslovakia. Many parents approached Winton and asked if their children could be sent to Great Britain. Some of these families weren't refugees, but were still at risk from the Nazis. To track these children, Winton began creating a list of the names, which increased day by day.
There were lines and lines from 4 o'clock in the morning or even all overnight in his hotel. He sat there at a chair and table and wrote these lists.
During his time in Prague, Winton attracted the interest of many volunteers. Like Winton, these volunteers had no affiliation with the British government, but helped him with his goal of sending these children to Britain. An office was soon set up on Vorsilska Street in Prague, and the volunteers continued creating lists of names of refugee children. After 3 weeks, Winton returned to London, where the stage was set for the largest challenges he would encounter, the reluctance from his own country. The British Department of Immigration, also known as the Home Office, placed strict regulations that were barriers for the unaccompanied children entering Great Britain. As part of the regulations set in place by the Home Office, Winton needed to pay a £50 bond in order to admit each child into Great Britain, a value equivalent to approximately $3,800 today. The stockbroker had a large network of connections and contacted many relatives, friends, and colleagues and hoped they would help him overcome this obstacle. The contributions that helped pay these bonds came from various individual and organizational sponsors. Another requirement Winton had to overcome was finding foster families.
They said to Nicholas Winton, okay, bring the children to England, we will give you permission, but you must find the families first.
In order to comply, Winton sent letters to various pictorial magazines across the country, such as the Picture Post. He attached portraits of the suffering children, encouraging them to print articles about the crisis in Czechoslovakia. This is how Winton identified foster families, who were reading their respective magazines. Many of these families weren't by any means wealthy, but were inspired by Winton's actions and wanted to help. When a foster family notified Winton, he came to their house with placards of children, consisting of 6 to 8 portraits, along with their name, date of birth, and religion. Once a family agreed on a child, their mark is placed on the placard and were allowed admittance into Great Britain. Despite the many obstacles encountered, the first group of Czech children left Prague on March 14, 1939. This transportation, later known as the Kindertransport, was one of 8 to leave Czechoslovakia. Before these children left, their parents had to make a terrible decision. Either they sent their children to Britain, suffered the pain of separation but ensuring their children a future, or remain together as a family in Czechoslovakia, only to face an uncertain fate. When a parent made the final choice to send their children to Great Britain, the train departed from Prague and traveled through Germany to get to the Netherlands. Afterwards, they took a ship to cross the North Sea into England. Finally, the children took a train to arrive at the destination of Liverpool Street Station in London. Unfortunately, on September 1, 1939, the inevitable occurred. Germany invaded Poland, which sparked the beginning of World War II. All borders in Europe were then closed. That same day, the 9th Kindertransport was scheduled to leave, carrying a total of 250 children. It was cancelled, and the children were never seen again.
That bothered him a lot. His whole life, he thought about that and talked about it a little bit.
In all, 669 children were directly saved by Winton's actions. Afterward, the stockbroker turned activist remained silent about his actions for nearly 50 years, until finally being presented to the public in 1988. From those 669 children, generations have passed. Though not all the children have been identified, it is estimated that over 6,000 descendants now owe their lives to Winton.
He was a humble man who had no interest at all in promoting himself.
Winton wasn't obliged to act during those 9 months. It took an enormous amount of courage, time, effort, and energy. He also had to constantly work to overcome the obstacles set by the English government. Despite that, he still decided to take a vital stand that inspired many others and created an everlasting ripple effect. Though Winton passed away on July 1, 2015 at the age of 106, he left behind a legacy that still inspires action today. Winton showed that it doesn't take a saint to make an impact. Whether it be saving the lives of 669 children in 1939 or volunteering to help a refugee family in 2017, the same is true. It only takes one stand to make an impact.
Is there anyone in our audience tonight who owes their life to Nicholas Winton? If so, could you stand up, please?